Number 10. The murder of Savannah Gold. A man in Florida was recently sentenced for the murder of his co-worker. It happened in 2017, with Lee Rodart Jr. killing Savannah Gold. The two had worked together at the Bonefish Grill in Mandarin. According to the prosecutors, the pair were in an on-again, off-again relationship for quite some time, while Savannah was working as the manager. Surveillance footage shows Savannah arriving to work at 5:30 at night, but never entering the restaurant. She instead goes into Lee's car, and that was the last time she was seen alive. Lee was seen on the footage taking something out of Savannah's car, then getting back into his own and driving away. At this point, the surveillance footage hadn't actually been checked. Nobody knew what was going on, and to make matters even more confusing, Savannah's family began getting text messages from her phone. But the text messages were weird, filled with spelling errors and strange wording. Her family immediately knew something was wrong. In the message, she claimed that she quit her job and ran away with her boyfriend. Despite all the strangeness, Lee still wasn't arrested. Savannah's family went looking for her, handed out flyers all over town. It took 3 days before the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office caught up with Lee, and he grudgingly admitted to the murder. He killed her and then dumped her body in a lake. Thankfully, he had been sentenced to 40 years in prison. Number 9. Going postal. By far, the most famous case of a coworker gone wrong goes back to 1991, when a former postal worker coined the phrase, going postal. It was Joseph Harris who walked into the post office in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and shot 2 of his former coworkers to death in a horrifying fit of rage. But believe it or not, these weren't the first killings. The night before, Joseph Harris had murdered his former supervisor by cutting him up with a samurai sword. He then shot her fiancée. Joseph Harris had had a difficult life up to that point. He was literally born in prison and suffered a lifetime of mental problems. In April of 1990, he was fired from his job at the post office. But, unbeknownst to the people left at the post office, he harbored a grudge against his ex-employer. Joseph began stockpiling weapons, including firearms, grenades, and swords. Roughly 2 years after he was fired, he learned that he had lost $10,000 by investing with a shady broker. Naturally, Harris dressed up in a ninja costume, broke in Edwards' house, assaulted Edwards' wife and both his daughters, then shot Edwards to death after making him watch. Harris was never caught for this crime because Edwards had caused a lot of people to lose money. There were actually too many suspects. It wasn't until he shot up the post office that they brought him in for this other crime as well. Harris was supposed to get the death penalty, but he ended up dropping dead of natural causes in 1996. Number 8. Not working hard enough. If telling someone they are working too slow is bad, telling an employee they're not working hard enough must be too. In Pennsylvania, the police had arrested a 51-year-old man for stabbing his coworker. This isn't actually that unusual in the United States, but the details of this case make it one of the most bizarre. The stabber is Anthony Towles, currently charged with 2 felony counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of terroristic threats. According to the police officials, the incident happened outside of a Five Guys burger restaurant in the city of Altoona. Both Anthony and his victim were working at the restaurant, but they had gotten into an argument. The victim, who happened to be the manager, accused Anthony of not working hard enough. He said Anthony was slacking off and that he needed to get his stuff together if he wanted to keep his job. Well, the argument got so heated that the pair took it into the parking lot. Then, Anthony informed his manager that he was going to kill him. He then took out a pen from one of his socks. And no, we have no idea why he was keeping a pen in his sock, and stabbed his manager in the face with it. Anthony told police that he was only trying to hit him in the shoulder with the pen, but either way, it ended up penetrating his head, just behind his ear and a few inches from his carotid artery. The manager survived. Anthony has obviously been fired, and he's currently been kept at the Blair County Prison while he awaits sentencing. Number 7. Spoilers at Domino's Pizza. In Texas, a man was beaten up at work because of the Avengers. It happened just after the hit movie Avengers Endgame came out. A guy went into work at Domino's Pizza, started talking to his coworkers about the ending of the film, and Justin Gregory's surface snapped. Gregory hadn't seen the movie yet and had made a point he didn't want any spoilers. Then lo and behold, his coworker went and ruined the movie for him. 11 franchises, 21 movies, and 11 years of Marvel films all accumulated in a 3-hour-long epic, and it was just simply ruined. Understandably, Greg lost his marbles. He attacked his coworker like he was trying to take on Thanos, beating the poor guy so badly that his other coworkers called the cops. But believe it or not, the cops actually sympathized with Gregory. Rather than charging him with assault, they left him off with a citation. Clearly, the officers understood just how important the movie was. The moral of the story here is, well, don't spoil things for Gregory. Do you think Gregory was justified in this assault? And for that matter, what would you do if one of your coworkers spoiled something you had been waiting 11 years for? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Working Rampage. In Davenport, a disagreement on the job resulted in a triple murder. Sheriff Grady Judd had identified the 3 contractors who were killed in Polk County by their out-of-control coworker as Kevin Lanusse, Delwan Donnell, and Gregory Dolezal. The murderer is Sean Runyon, who had been working with the victims on an electrical contract for the company Publix. All 4 of them worked for J&B Electric, based in Pennsylvania. They were staying together in a rental home, but obviously they weren't very good roommates. The rampage started when Sean's supervisor, Kevin Lanusse, told him that he needed to work faster. Anyone who's ever been accused of working too slowly knows just how well this lovely compliment can improve their speed. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Sean was actually so angry that he punched Kevin in the face and walked off the job. But it didn't end there. Sean returned to their shared housing the next morning, just before 10 a.m., and murdered all 3 of his coworkers while they slept by beating them to death with a baseball bat. That's about as brutal as it gets, to be quite honest. Just try to imagine being woken up in the morning by an angry coworker bludgeoning your brains out of your head with a bat. Gregory Dolezal managed to escape the beating and run through the house, but Sean caught up to him and finished off the job with a knife. Naturally, Sean fled the scene and tried to escape, but he was eventually tracked down by the police and arrested. He's now being held without bond and will probably be sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Number 5. The stabbing of Carolyn Byington. A married man has been charged with murdering his female coworker after following her home during her lunch break. This guy was an accountant in New Jersey, whose wife had actually given birth to their first child just before the murder took place. The body of Carolyn Byington, just 26 years old, was discovered in her apartment after she failed to return to work after her lunch break. The police found her with multiple stab wounds, as well as an obvious sign of blunt force trauma. But just like the story we talked about, it took the police way too long to identify Kenneth Saul as her murderer. They investigated for weeks before they finally caught up to the guy. The pair had worked at a place called Engine, a marketing firm based in New Jersey. According to Carolyn's neighbors, they had heard screams and the sound of furniture being moved about just before the police performed the wellness check that ultimately resulted in the discovery of her lifeless body. In the days following, Kenneth was noted as acting strangely. He continuously asked his coworkers suspicious questions about Carolyn's death, such as whether someone could have been convicted for that type of murder based on circumstantial evidence. Ultimately, the police learned that Kenneth had actually been waiting for Carolyn to arrive at her home from her lunch break. He had planned the whole thing out. When they arrested him, they even found what they believed to be the murder weapon. However, Kenneth never gave a motive for the crime. Maybe he was jealous of her youth and good looks. Maybe she had ignored him one too many times in the office. We just don't know. Number 4. Off with his head. In Oklahoma, an employee at a food processing plant was fired. This kind of thing happens every day, but this guy took it personally. Immediately after he was let go, he drove to a different part of the processing plant, walked into the office where his boss was sitting, and chopped the guy's head off. Oh yes, he beheaded his boss. That's definitely one way to make a point. Then, presumably caught up in his bloodlust, he walked out with the same knife that he had just used to cut the man's head off and stabbed the secretary several times. Luckily, the secretary made it to the hospital in time and was able to survive, but the headless man, well, he was dead. According to Moore Police Sergeant Jeremy Lewis, the killer was then shot down by the president and chief operating officer of the company. Mark was also a reserve deputy with the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Department. He was able to keep his cool, interpret the situation, and wound the killer as he tried to continue his rampage. The police have identified the murderous ex-employee as Alton Nolan, 30 years old. He was taken to the hospital in stable condition and should make a full recovery, enabling him to spend the rest of his life in jail. As for why he was fired in the first place, he had recently converted to Islam and was trying to convert his coworkers. His coworkers eventually complained enough that Alton was let go, at which point he went full psycho. Imagine being that secretary who saw her boss get his head chopped off and was stabbed just sitting in her office. Number 3. Ran over twice. A drunken argument between a pair of construction workers escalated into an attempted murder in Milwaukee. According to Racine County prosecutors, 29-year-old Ivan Verbinski got so fed up with his annoying coworker that he got in his truck, ran the guy over, then backed up and ran over him again. He has since been caught by the police, and it wasn't exactly the sneakiest crime. He was then charged with first-degree reckless endangering, as well as a hit and run. If found guilty on all charges, he could end up spending 18 years in prison. By the time officers showed up at the scene, paramedics were already treating the victim. He informed the officers that Ivan had run him over without cause. But according to eyewitnesses, the victim had actually picked up a cinder block and tried to throw it through the window of Ivan's truck. Interpreting that as an attempt on his life, Ivan then hit the gas, swerved directly at the victim, and ran him down. But before he left, he backed up and drove over the victim's already crippled body. The victim suffered severe bruising and lacerations, though he miraculously didn't have a single broken bone. Number 2. A killing break. In Hiroshima, Japan, a young worker at the Mazda Motor Corporation was arrested after killing one of his coworkers inside a company dormitory, then stealing all his cash. His name is Suguru Kamikawa, and he's currently being charged with beating 19-year-old Koyuhei Sugano to death with a fire extinguisher. According to the police, he killed the young man after learning that he had withdrawn nearly $12,000 from an ATM earlier in the day. Knowing that Koyuhei had all that cash on him was simply too tempting. And then Suguru cornered him in a stairwell of their dormitory and whacked him on the head with the fire extinguisher until he stopped breathing. It's not clear exactly how he had anticipated getting away with this crime. He didn't exactly have anywhere to run, and he wasn't going to get far with such a small amount of money. Plus, he actually returned to work after committing the murder. It didn't take long for the police to put together the pieces. When they questioned Suguru, he broke down and admitted what he did. But he said it wasn't just to rob the boy. It was because they had gotten into an argument, and, in a blind fit of rage, he picked up the fire extinguisher and did what he felt had to be done. And number 1, the blowhard. In Japan, a man has been arrested for blowing air up his friend's butt at work. He never meant to kill him, but the unusual prank resulted in the death of Akio Ishimaru anyway. The pair worked together at an industrial equipment manufacturing plant. The killer in this case is Yoshiyuki Yoshida, and according to him, the pair had been goofing around when he thought it would be funny to shove the nozzle of an air compressor up his coworker's butt. He then plunged the trigger and blasted air straight into his body, thinking it would just be a funny joke. Almost immediately, Mr. Ishimaru started to feel unwell. In fact, he felt terrible. Enough so that he left the job site and raced to the hospital. But unfortunately, there was just nothing the doctors could do to save him. The air had shot up his butt with such force that it damaged his lungs, and he died. And in case you were wondering, the air hose wasn't actually shoved in his butt. I'm talking about over-the-pants stuff here. But the air pressure was so intense that the air pushed through the clothing and entered the body anyway. It may have just been a prank, and both men had obviously just been messing around. But Yoshiyuki is still looking at jail time for the manslaughter.
Number 9. Eric John Montgomery and Peaches Sochev. In late 2018, 39-year-old Eric Montgomery and 41-year-old Peaches Sochev found themselves in hot water with the law when they were arrested for possession of methamphetamine with intent to sell. Police in the city of Visalia caught the pair with 2 ounces of meth, which is worth anywhere between $600 and $8,000, as well as other items indicating that they planned to sell the drug. A social media post featuring their mugshots also clarified that police think there may have been more drugs hidden, but they weren't sure where. The mugshots went viral on social media, with many commenters wondering why Montgomery had a large bulbous bump on his forehead. It generated so much attention that police felt compelled to publicly clarify that the bump is a medical condition and that it had nothing to do with Montgomery's arrest. Some people didn't find the situation amusing at all. One person wrote that they were disappointed in the news station who were posting the mugshots to mock the couple. They found it especially appalling that people found his medical condition entertaining. Number 8. Sitara Stratton. Sitara Stratton grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but she always felt destined for both the big city and the big screen. After training as an actress in New York City in her late teens, she moved to Hollywood in 2006 to pursue her dream of becoming a star. She landed some small-time gigs while working in retail to make ends meet. But as Sitara soon learned, the path to stardom is anything but easy. After surviving a robbery, she ended up in the hospital and lost her day job. When she couldn't make rent, Sitara began couch surfing between her friends' homes. Things became even more challenging when the young woman got addicted to drugs. She went to rehab and got clean in 2011, but dropped off the radar one day just a few months later. Suspecting that Sitara was being held against her will by Paul Constantinescu, the man who got her into drugs, her mother filed a missing persons report. The police initially treated it as a voluntary disappearance, but eventually turned up the pressure on Constantinescu. 6 months after vanishing, Sitara appeared at a hospital, covered in cigarette burns and scratches. Clumps of hair were missing from her head. Just as her mother had suspected, she claimed that Constantinescu had held her prisoner, tortured her, and injected her with drugs the whole time. Sitara had convinced her captor to let her go to the hospital when he began running out of money for motels to hide her at. Constantinescu was a sex offender with a history of violent crimes, but he was never charged with any wrongdoing in Sitara's disappearance. Even more tragically, the aspiring starlet died from a drug overdose in 2017 at just 29 years old. Number 7. Anonymous arsonists. When their car overheated along a Stockton, California road in 1989, a father and son set out to find a payphone. While they walked, they noticed a jacket lying on the roadside with a VHS tape inside it. The curious pair took the tape home and watched it. To their horror, the tape contained homemade footage of a burning house, narrated by a panting man who uttered bizarre statements in a low whisper. He said, "This is hell," and "Look at the flames. Listen to the coyotes yell," as well as "Ancient spirits of evil. Look at it. The fire department is trying to put it out. What a laugh." The disturbed viewers turned the video over to the police, who revisited the scene where it was found. Officers found a ceramic skull, a mortar and pestle near where the jacket was discovered, and concluded that Satan worshippers were likely responsible for the arson. Unsolved Mysteries featured the strange film, and viewers called in, identifying the crime scene's location as Redwood City, where the house had burned down the previous year. The tips led police to the culprits, 2 troubled teenage boys who were a lot less intimidating in real life than they seemed in their sickening self-made movie. Because the suspects were underage, their identities were never revealed. Police linked the pair to at least 11 other fires in the area. One of the boys was sent to a psychiatric facility, while the other went to juvenile detention. As far as anyone knows, they served their time and were never linked to any later crimes. What would you do if you found a mysterious and disturbing video like this? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Patrice Richardson. One evening in 2009, 24-year-old Patrice Richardson visited a restaurant in Malibu alone. She couldn't pay her $89 bill and was reportedly acting strange, stating that she was from Mars and rambling nonsensically about astrology. So the confused and concerned employees called the police. Officers determined that Patrice wasn't intoxicated, but they took her into custody for not paying her meal and for possessing a small amount of marijuana. Patrice's mother told the staff at the sheriff's station that she was concerned about her daughter's mental health and safety, especially since her car was towed and she had no way to get home. They originally agreed not to let Patrice go until later in the morning, but had a change of heart and released her around midnight. Since they didn't think Patrice showed any signs of mental illness, the jailers saw no reason to suspect her mother's wishes. Patrice was last seen around 6:30 a.m. in the backyard of a local news anchor, Bill Smith's home. She told Smith that she was just resting and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was the last time she was ever seen alive. Park rangers discovered Patrice's remains 11 months after she vanished in the Santa Monica Mountains, roughly 8 miles from the sheriff's station she was released from. Her death remains unsolved. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has come under fire for its handling of the case from the beginning, with the decision to let Patrice leave in the middle of the night with no ride, money, or phone. The agency is also accused of mishandling Patrice's remains by collecting her bones before a coroner arrived on the scene, possibly obscuring any important details that could have been gleaned by having an expert examine her remains the way they were found. Number 5. Pierre April. Imagine waking up on a roadside in an unfamiliar place and having no idea who you are. That's what happened to a man named Pierre in 1992 when he woke up in a California ditch and couldn't think of anyone to call for help. All he had with him was a blue duffel bag, and the only clue to his possible identity was a Boston library card for someone named Pierre April. The man's only memories were of San Diego, located 400 miles north of where he regained consciousness, and his recollection was foggy at best. With just $17 in his pocket, the confused wanderer hitchhiked to San Diego, hoping to regain his memory. But when he got there, he didn't recognize his surroundings. A bus driver took him to a homeless shelter, where experts performed extensive tests and concluded that his amnesia was genuine and trauma-induced, although they admitted that it's highly unusual for someone to suffer from the condition as long as Pierre had. Bits and pieces of the man's memory returned over time, including visions of a woman named Carol, who he believed was a former co-worker. But composite drawings initially failed to yield any fruitful connections. Finally, a former co-worker named Carol saw the case on Unsolved Mysteries and called the show's telecenter. She identified the man as a Canadian citizen named Pierre April, as his library card had indicated. Pierre's family said that he was missing for at least 5 months before they learned of his whereabouts. His memory finally came back to him after reuniting with his loved ones and looking at photos and other things from his past. But the details surrounding his disappearance remain a strange mystery to this day. 4. McStay Family. In early February 2010, 40-year-old Joseph McStay vanished from his Fallbrook, California home with his 43-year-old wife, Summer, and their 2 preschool-aged sons, Gianni and Joey Jr. They left food on the counter to rot, and their beloved pet dogs were left outside in the cold. The McStay's vehicle was soon found abandoned near the US-Mexico border, leading investigators to suspect that the family had fled the country. But an international search brought detectives no closer to finding the McStays, who remained missing for nearly 4 years. Then one day, someone found a child's skull while riding their dirt bike in the desert. Police reported to the scene, where they dug up the remains of all 4 family members. The victims were beaten to death and then buried with the same sledgehammer that was used to carry out the gruesome murders. Joseph McStay's business partner, Charles Chase Merritt, was the last known person to have contact with the deceased man. Merritt's DNA was found in the family's car, and other small signs added up to point to him as the main suspect. Once they felt they had enough evidence, police charged him with murder. Not everyone thought Merritt was responsible for the brutal killings. Joseph's own father, Patrick, said at one point that he doubted the suspect's guilt. But Merritt was nevertheless found guilty and was sentenced to death last year. He continues to maintain his innocence and is challenging his conviction. The court already upheld Merritt's conviction once, and we can only hope it stays that way. Number 3. Christy Giles. In mid-November, 24-year-old model Christy Giles went out partying in West Hollywood with her friend Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola. They ended up at an apartment with 3 men they met at a warehouse party and stayed there for 10 to 12 hours, but nobody knows what happened while they were there. Later that day, a group of men wearing dark-colored clothing and bandanas over their faces pulled up to a hospital in a car with the plates removed and dumped Christy's body at the entrance. Hours later, the same group dumped Hilda outside of another hospital. Christy was dead. Her body bore no signs of a struggle, suggesting that she had possibly been drugged. Meanwhile, Hilda clung to life. She was put on life support and passed away 2 weeks later. Christy's husband, Jan Cilliers, told the press that heroin was found in Hilda's system. He said that neither of the women would ever voluntarily touch the drug. Cilliers further revealed the text exchange between Christy and Hilda indicate that they were uncomfortable at the apartment and that they summoned an Uber with plans to leave. Shortly after that, Christy's phone activity stopped completely, and the pair never got in their Uber. Neighbors claimed that they heard someone moaning from inside the apartment for hours before either woman's body was discarded. The men who rent the apartment reportedly told the police that the women overdosed and that they took the pair to the hospital immediately. No arrests have been made, and the victims' loved ones are hoping to see justice sooner rather than later. Number 2. Viola Hagen Court. On February 18, 1980, someone entered 79-year-old Viola Hagen Court's apartment in Anaheim and brutally sexually assaulted her before strangling her to death. A neighbor became worried when she didn't see Viola for 2 days and went into the senior citizen's apartment, where they found her remains. Sadly, the case went cold, and it stayed that way for over 40 years. Last year, police announced they were reopening the investigation into Viola's murder. DNA testing led detectives to a man named Andre William Lepere, who was now living in New Mexico. It must have come as a surprise to the suspect when the New Mexico State Police nabbed him at his home earlier this year and hauled him off to Otero County Jail, where he was held without bail pending extradition hearings. While it's unfortunate that the alleged killer walked free for most of his adult life following the disturbing crime, stories like this remind us that it's never too late to get justice, and how DNA technology is proving to be a game changer when it comes to keeping the most dangerous members of society off the street. Number 1. Mirella Ponce. Most people don't exactly look their best when they have their mugshot taken, but this can't be said for Mirella Ponce, whose shockingly glamorous mug appeared online in late 2017. The 20-year-old brunette bombshell had been arrested by the Fresno Police Department for having a loaded firearm in her possession. She was taken into custody following a routine traffic stop while driving around with 2 fellow gang members and her baby. In addition to her mugshot, the police department posted a photo of a pink and black pistol they seized from Ponce. Not surprisingly, the images attracted a lot of followers, including some who promised to send money and gifts to her in jail. But not everyone was swayed by Ponce's good looks. One social media user interrupted the gushing commentary by reminding everyone that the young woman had endangered a child with her gang connections and was accused of a serious crime. At least a handful of shockingly attractive mugshots have come out of California over the years. In 2014, a photo of a tattooed man with stunning blue eyes and chilled cheekbones made the rounds on social media like no mugshot ever had before. His name is Jeremy Meeks, and he was 30 years old at the time. He was facing numerous serious weapons charges and a gang charge. But the unexpected attention he received was enough to turn his entire life around almost overnight when he was offered a modeling contract shortly after his arrest. Meeks hung up his hat as a member of the Crips gang and legitimately became a multi-millionaire. Things still appear to be going well for him. He don't see luck like this every day.
Number 10. Paratrooper and the Eagle. A paraglider almost had his life cut short by some crazy wild birds. The paraglider's name is Vladimir Zarkov, an adrenaline junkie from Russia who was taking his first paragliding trip over the Himalayas. For those of you who don't know, paragliding is when you basically float to the ground using a large parachute contraption. It's like hang gliding, but not really. You use the parachute instead of holding on to an oversized paper airplane. While Vladimir was paragliding through the beautiful Himalayan mountains in Nepal, he was attacked by a pair of vicious eagles. It's unclear whether they purposely attacked him, but either way, both eagles rammed straight into his parachute, causing him to freefall. One of the eagles got tangled up in his parachute cords and rendered it useless. He was spiraling towards the ground at blistering speed, in danger of losing all control. But luckily, Vladimir managed to reach his emergency parachute and slow down his descent. He still crashed into a tree instead of gently landing on the ground, but at least he didn't make a pancake out of himself. As for the eagle that got in his way, it was still tangled in his parachute ropes when he reached the ground. It was alive, and to be honest, probably just as frightened and confused as Vladimir. Number 9. 15 Elephant Rampage. On the outskirts of a Chinese city, a herd of 15 elephants went on a wild rampage in the summer of 2021. They left a trail of destruction over 300 miles long across southern China. The experts say it's all because the male pack leader got lost and led the herd into uncharted territory. The elephants were first spotted moving towards the city of Kunming in the Yunnan province after breaking out of a nature preserve. They got so close to the city that officials had to block the road using trucks, while the elephants wandered through the countryside, destroying farmland. It was such a catastrophe that over 76 squad cars were used to try and push the giant herd of animals back into the forest. Wildlife officers were flying drones to monitor the progress of the elephants, with over 360 people involved in an effort to divert them away from the city. When their rampage began, there were actually 16 elephants. But then 2 of them turned around and went home, and a baby was born during the march. This brought the number down to 15. The small town of Ashan was shut down, with residents warned to stay inside, while the elephants wandered through the streets. breaking into barns, eating out of trash cans, and tearing up crops. By the time the elephants finally got back on track and started looping back home, they had done an estimated $1.1 million in damage. Number 8. Canadian Bear Attack. In Canada, a man is lucky to be alive after he was brutally attacked by a giant black bear. His name is Richard Wesley, from the province of Ontario. He was out hunting near the Fire River when he spotted the huge bear no more than about 100 feet away from him. Naturally, he took out his phone and started filming. The bear was mandling around, completely unaware that Richard had even snuck up on it. But then the two got very close. As the bear turned, it realized it was staring into the face of a human. Richard tried to make himself look bigger, waving his bow around and making a lot of noise. But this only made the bear angrier. In the shocking footage taken by Richard, you can see the bear charging at him and jumping right onto his chest. The bear's massive paws outstretched to do maximum damage. The only reason Richard is still alive is that he was able to put his bow into the bear's mouth as it tried to rip his throat out with its huge teeth. It then became a wrestling match, with the Canadian man struggling for about 15 seconds before the bear finally gave up and took off in the other direction. It was like something you would see in a cartoon, but it happened in real life. Richard didn't even suffer any injuries, except for a bruised elbow where a bear tossed him onto the ground. Amazingly, he didn't even break his glasses. Number 7. The CarryOn Snake. Authorities in India were shocked when an X-ray scan revealed that a passenger was carrying something unusual in their luggage. That something happened to be one of the most venomous snakes in the world, and definitely illegal to try and bring on a plane. It wasn't even in the guy's suitcase that would have put under the plane, but in his carry-on luggage. It happened at the Cochin airport, with the passenger trying to catch a flight to Abu Dhabi. The snake was a juvenile Indian crate, something so venomous that just one bite can kill a person. The passenger was immediately arrested, though he was later released when the police became convinced that he had not brought the snake on the plane on purpose. After all, what would the point of that even be? I guess he could have unleashed the snake on the plane and watched the chaos unfold, but that seems like a plan that could backfire. If the snake bit him, it's not like there's any anti-venom stashed in the cockpit. Instead, the man insisted that he purchased a bag of potatoes from a farmer just before his trip. The snake must have stowed away in the potatoes, then made its way into his luggage. He's extremely lucky that he didn't reach into his bag to grab something while traveling between his house and the airport. Otherwise, he probably would have wound up in the morgue instead of the airport jail. What would you do if you found a venomous snake in your luggage? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Alligator Crime. On Boar Island in Indonesia, a young girl was bathing in the river with her friends. Her name was Suki Ramanhandi, just 8 years old. According to what Indonesian officials told news outlets, she was then ambushed by a giant crocodile and literally eaten alive in front of her terrified friends. The other little girls could do nothing except scream in horror as their friend moved deeper and deeper into the crocodile's mouth. All the screaming alerted adults nearby, who rushed onto the scene with spears and tried to prevent the little girl from being consumed. But by the time they reached the crocodile, the only part of the little girl still visible was her head inside the crocodile's throat. The villagers did manage to kill the croc with their spears, but it was too late. She was already gone. They didn't even find the child's remains in its belly. Her remains were found later floating in the water. The saltwater crocodile simply ate her up and spat her out, almost as if for fun. Number 5. A Grinchy Raccoon. A 70-year-old woman was getting into the Christmas spirit. It was early December, and time to hang the Christmas lights. But as she was hanging the lights, she became the victim of a rampaging raccoon. We don't really know what exactly the raccoon's motive was here. Maybe it had just watched The Grinch and was upset about the Christmas lights. Whatever the case, Donna Sanguinario described the event of that day as the worst nightmare of her life. She said that during the attack, both her and the raccoon were screaming insanely loud enough to wake the dead. Oh yeah, and she also admitted that she thought she was going to die. This traumatic attack took place in Massachusetts. Donna had no warning that the raccoon was coming, except for a strange noise that she heard behind her. When she turned, the raccoon was standing 10 feet away and leering at her. Normally, raccoons don't just attack people for no reason. When they see people, they run away. But in this case, the raccoon closed those 10 feet in a second and jumped on Donna, sinking its little raccoon teeth into her. The raccoon showed no signs of giving up either. It bit, scratched, and screamed as Donna tried to get away. Luckily, the elderly woman managed to get the raccoon in a headlock and literally squeezed until she heard its neck snap. The animal felt silent, Donna dropped it, and she thought that was the end. But much to her amazement, the raccoon got up and walked away as if nothing happened. She herself went to the local emergency room, got some rabies and tetanus shots, and was home with a few scrapes and one heck of a good Christmas story. Number 4. Moose attacks tourists. Disaster struck at the Zhurdkul National Park in Russia just last November when a moose attacked a little girl. Before we go any further, keep in mind that a fully grown moose can be over 800 pounds. And that's exactly how big this one was when it rampaged against a group of tourists who were trying to feed the animal. At first, the moose seemed totally docile. The enormous, truly monstrous creature didn't seem to mind the dozens or so tourists crowding it, taking pictures and patting it on its nose. But like most wild animals, the moose soon got tired of being oogled at by the humans. The little girl standing in front of it took the brunt of its sudden attack. She was booted by its powerful front legs so hard that she flew forward and skidded across the ground. The crowd, which moments ago had been so fond of the moose, then screamed at it and chased it away back into the forest. The little girl came out okay. She was wearing a big winter jacket that likely padded the force of the kick. And the tourists learned a valuable lesson: don't play with wildlife. Number 3. Wild boar bites a cop. Authorities in Hong Kong have launched a hunt for the maniac who bit one of their officers. But this maniac isn't a person, it's a wild boar. Hong Kong has been plagued with wild boars for years. They get lost in the subway system. They loiter in the streets and get fed by local residents. And they're generally just inconvenient. But just a little while ago, a police officer was bit by one of these wild boars. Now that a cop has been attacked, authorities have launched into action to track down and get rid of these pesky animals. Prior to this attack, the rule when dealing with wild boars was to capture them and bring them to a remote area. But that has done absolutely nothing to stop them from roaming around hiking trails and trying to bite people. In Hong Kong, wild boars have wandered into police stations, malls, and even disrupted flights at the airport. Authorities will now be euthanizing the boars to try and bring their numbers down, and mainly because one cop got bit and now he's sour about it. Number 2. A big cat fight. For the first time ever, scientists captured footage of something nobody ever knew was possible. A hidden camera in the Maya Biosphere Reserve in Guatemala captured an ocelot sitting down at a watering hole to have a drink. From the darkness of the forest behind the ocelot, an even bigger cat comes into the frame and ambushes the smaller one. The bigger cat is a jaguar. It takes only one bite from the jaguar to kill the ocelot. Then it slinks off with the other cat in its jaws. Scientists have suspected that bigger cats will prey on smaller cats in the wild, but it's never been proven. Ocelot remains have been found before in jaguar feces, suggesting jaguars eat smaller cats, but this is the first time that anyone's ever seen it. Jaguars, enormous predatory jungle cats that can grow to about 250 pounds, hunt ocelots like they would hunt rabbits. And ocelots are pretty big themselves, ranging from between 18 to 44 pounds. Both eat fish and frogs, monkeys and rodents, but apparently jaguars have absolutely no discretion when it comes to what they eat. It's really crazy because according to Daniel Thornton from Washington State University, predator-on-predator interactions are rare in the wild. Predators almost always stay out of each other's way. This attack could be due to dwindling resources, water scarcity, and reduction in natural habitat. And number 1. Jackal Rampage. Just about 40 people recently became the victims of one of the most bizarre animal attacks in history. A jackal went on a wild rampage through 5 villages in India, leaving dozens of people injured, including women and children. According to one resident of the Jamira village, they were working on their farm when the animal came out of nowhere and started biting them. The attack was so sudden that the farmers were left helpless. When it was finally over, they had to limp their way to the hospital for treatment, leaving behind them a trail of blood. And that was only one attack. The beast went from village to village, causing mayhem and biting every person it caught in the street. It didn't kill anyone, since it was just a jackal, but it did maim at every opportunity. Villagers finally banded together and ambushed the jackal, putting its reign of terror to an end. But this unprecedented attack still left 40 people injured, and by something that's basically just an oversized, mangy dog. Thanks for watching. What's the craziest animal attack you've ever seen with your own 2 eyes? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for more amazing videos. See you next time.